everyone. I'm Fernanda Lopez. I am the PR and Communications Manager here at Helen Woodward Animal Center. And we're so excited that you're joining us for PAWmicon Virtual. We're going to get started with our Animals in Graphics Novels and Games panel. And you know, so many pets have inspired movies, TV, books, but they've also been featured in video games and comic books. So we're going to be talking a lot about that over the next hour. But first, I want to introduce you to our moderator. That's going to be Robert Rice. He is the CEO of Transmira Inc. and an entrepreneur for 25 years, an industry veteran who has pioneered augmented and virtual reality. He's an author, a speaker, a tech evangelist, which I love, a startup advisor, and he supports and speaks widely about advancing the state-of-the-art of interactive technologies. So I do want to give a special thank you to Robert. Of course, Transmira is part of Omniscape, and they're powering our augmented and virtual reality experiences here for PAWmicon, and we're so grateful. So Robert, please take it away.
Cool, thank you very much, really appreciate it. So we've got some pretty phenomenal panelists here today, which I'm really excited. I've unfortunately haven't had the chance to interact with you guys professionally, but hoping maybe that'll change in the future. So we'll get started. So first we've got Chris Ryle, who's the president, publisher, and chief creative officer at IDW Publishing, as well as an award-winning author and Eisner-nominated writer for dozens of comic series, including his co-creation Zombies vs. Robots, which is in development with Sony Pictures, Groom Lake, The Colonized, Hollows, and much more. He's also written one of my favorites, Douglas Adams' Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, which is great stuff, and collaborated with Stephen King, Richard Matheson, Clive Barker, and apparently the rock band Kiss, which I'm sure was an exciting experience there. He's also the co-author of a prose book about comics, Comic Books 101. And we also have Keith Aram here, who's a writer, director, and producer, and CEO and president of the Los Angeles-based PCB Productions. Keith is a multi-platform storyteller with a successful career in video games, interactive media, music, graphic novels, animation, motion pictures, television, and of course my favorite, augmented and virtual reality. So both you guys are super seriously accomplished. I thought I was a big guy, but like, wow, I'm kind of a little bit in awe. So I'm really excited to have a chance to talk to you guys today, and your awesome pets too, which I see kicking around there.
Thank you for having us.
Oh yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, happy to be here.
It's going to be really cool. And I do want to apologize in advance if my cat, Izzy, tends to walk by. She likes to just, brush me with her tail and stop, and just ignore it. She's like our HR cat, so it's all good. Okay, so to kind of get started with a few informal kind of just questions to kick things off first, and then we'll dive into some more cerebral meat about the industry. So the first question is obviously, do you have pets? I think the short answer is yes.
We can answer visually.
Yeah, you can answer visually. And can you tell us just a little bit about who they are and why they're awesome?
Yeah, I'll give him a break from my lap right now. But that's Morty. He is a one-eyed pug that we adopted from the Humane Society last September, and he shares a house with a couple of cats as well. We also have a one-eyed cat who we called Nick Furry, because he's missing the same eye as Shield's Nick Fury.
That's awesome.
And then we have a second cat as well who it's been about 8-9 months, and they're still kind of getting used to the idea of a dog in the house, but they all tend to interact relatively well.
Very cool. Keith?
That is awesome. Well, this is our new rambunctious pup, Ray. He's about 12 weeks old. He's number 7 in the family. So we've got 3 Shelties here, 2 guinea pigs, a bird, and a new kitten that just came yesterday. So the family here enjoys their pets. We lost one of our Shelties last year, and this guy's a spitting image of him. And they're just wonderful animals. We spend all of our day and night with these guys, and they have worked their way into our bedroom now, which we swore that would never happen. But this morning we woke up and 2 of them were on our feet, and then this guy is just getting used to the yard and everything else. But we're big animal people, and it's wonderful to have them like kind of just spending all the time in here. We run all of our recording studios here too, so they're studio dogs and they kind of run around and keep the clients happy.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so are you guys like me? Do you use the baby voice when you're talking to your dogs like all the time?
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny, like speaking of letting the dogs into the bedroom, because we also set out at the start to not do that, and that changed after about 2 days. We knew that pugs, have their breathing challenges, but he was just sort of an impulsive rescue when we were at the animal shelter, and so I wasn't aware. Nobody warned us of the snoring. It's like having roommates in college all over again. Like the snoring it's taken some real doing to get used to, because it's pretty hard to sleep through.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Ray's gonna go down for a nap. It's time for his little nap. There he goes.
Oh, it's adorable. So so clearly it's like you guys' pets are part of your professional lives. Have they inspired you at all, or animals in general? I mean, how much of an impact do they have on your work?
I mean, the good thing about IDW is like we publish a lot of animal-based comics, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and My Little Pony and all that. So I mean, just there's always been kind of a through line of animals and animal love with a lot of us at the company. And one of the things that when I took over as president a year and a half ago, there was previously a no dogs allowed kind of rule for the most part. So I changed that, because in my working life, like it's always made it better to have dogs around the office. I mean, they can cause their occasional disruptions, but then again, so can people. And just sort of it's everybody's day to see dogs sort of cruising around the hallways. And so I think it drives us in that way, and that as much as we can sort of do things that incorporate our dogs into our work days, it just makes it better on everybody.
Yeah, for us, it's in the workplace, it's unbelievable how much it balances out. No matter how much stress or how much work you have going on, dog comes over to you and just wants that affection, and it just takes away kind of any of the stress that's going on. And so that's been very helpful, not just for us, for our clients and the actors we work with, because it just instantly provides a comforting and nurturing environment for them. So that I think really grounds everybody in why we're doing our work, and just sort of passing along the sort of the goodwill of what we want to put forward. But then in the work itself, my film I just did last year, I was able to get my dog Cooper into the movie, and he wakes up one of the main characters. And I always love having cameos of our pets in our projects whenever we can get away with it. It's just kind of a nice little part of a homage to our pets, but also just kind of a memorializing them in the projects and how they've influenced us. We've had teams and other projects, some of the games we've had, the developers are so charmed by the dogs that they start blogs and they incorporate stuff into the video games with our dogs, especially Ash, our dog of 15 years. And he was a huge favorite. He's got his own Instagram and Twitter following. And we have a new PCB Pups Instagram that the family just started, and we're going to start populating that. And we've already had a few hundred people starting to follow us, just putting up the dogs.
That's awesome.
If you'll indulge one thing, we haven't published this yet, but we did. So we published a book called Rom Space Night, which was a book I loved as a kid that Hasbro now owns, and I brought back years ago. And so I wrote the revival, and so I just recently got a commission from an artist named Ryan Lee. And if I can just, I was going to try to share my screen to show you. I got a piece that incorporated my pug into the artwork.
Yeah, absolutely.
But anyway, yeah. So as much as we can, I think we interact and bring our dogs and pets into our work wherever we can.
Well, that leads me to my next question. What's your favorite project or a recent project where your pets have had a strong influence, or one that you really, really enjoyed that was just like special?
Keith, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, this one in particular, Phoenix Incident was the first film I got a chance to direct, and that was it was just a great experience being able to do that. And the cast was already familiar with our pets, and so to bring them in was great. And I think having that experience really just solidified sort of the relationship that we also had on set that was there, and having the safety of being able to have, a pet involved in that. So for me, for the next projects, having pets involved into that, I think, obviously having well-trained pets or having from pet trainers being involved is important, but having your own pets involved is, I think, just a little bit more personal, for the projects.
Yeah, I haven't incorporated my dog into an actual comic yet, but I will say that I wrote this alien thing recently, and one of the alien races borrows a lot of traits from pugs, let's say. So he's sort of inspired and informed the work in that way.
So how do aliens handle bad snoring?
Well, luckily, I mean, at least some of the different races don't have ears, so, or at least they process sound differently than we do. So I think they could probably make it through the night easier than I can.
That's very cool. So, okay, next question. Looking at both, graphic novels and games and movies, and everything else, at the end of the day, it's basically storytelling, and, different mediums, different technologies. But what's your perspective or opinion on the importance of animals in storytelling, or how they influence storytelling over, the centuries, the millennia, starting from, those first, fires where the verbal, histories and stories were told, to, Aesop's fables, even more modern day story. How have animals really had an impact there?
I mean, in different ways. You could use them as stand-ins for humans in some stories, like sort of the seminal graphic novel Mouse that cast Nazis and the Jewish people in the internment camps and as cats and mice, and so you could sort of, like, in that way they use the book to sort of expose the horrors of the real world in a way that it's the wrong phrasing to say made it palatable, but at least it sort of allowed that story to be told to a broader audience without really the focus on the sort of very human horrors that people are subjected to, which, in that way it allowed younger readers to sort of become aware of the history and the humanity and all of the things that were covered in that graphic novel, in a way that, using animals just allowed you to tell that story in a different way, and I think in a more broad way, instead of focusing on specific, actual individuals. And then, in a more positive way, animals very often are used to humanize characters. They're, somebody who owns a dog can't be all bad, right?
Well, I think you see that in, like, you look at like I Am Legend, right? And his whole relationship with having this dog going alongside of him. I mean, in some ways, he was one of the most important characters in that movie when they made the film, right? Because you cared so much about that dog. And also, if you see someone who cares for a dog, that says a lot about them. So if you look in sci-fi or horror films, like if you look at like The Thing, right? Like John Carpenter's The Thing, the not only how they portray the dog at the beginning who's been infiltrated by the alien, but then obviously when it starts to take over the other dogs and the guys who take care of them, those who are sympathetic to the dogs versus having to put the dogs down, it says a lot about all the different characters in the story. So that really does humanize or dehumanize a lot of the characters just by their relationship with animals, especially when it comes to dogs like that.
We watched Independence Day this past week, and my kid had never seen it before, and so there's the scene in the tunnel where there's all the explosions and things, and Will Smith's family dog is running through the tunnels. There's all, everybody's getting blown up and cars are going flying. And her whole concern was, is the dog going to be okay? And I think that's the other thing too, is, you tend to get more vested in the animals because the animals are largely innocents in stories. And so, it tends to have more of an impact on people if something bad happens to an animal than humans in a lot of cases.
Yeah, because a lot of times animals represent this devoted, loyalty that you don't see. I mean, humans can have ulterior motives. They can have sort of a reason for befriending someone or betraying someone. But when it comes to a dog or any of these animals that get portrayed, it's just pure devotion, and there is no compromise in that. And so I think that when they are used in storytelling, that is either very divisive or it is showing that humanity in a very true way, because an animal is not going to have an ulterior motive. And that's, I think, why when you see animals that do get personified, like wolves or other animals that are kind of portrayed, Jaws, for example, you have an animal that is so one-sided as a pure killing machine or whatever. And that's, to me, what made Alien in the first Ridley Scott film so terrifying. Is here's you have an animal with no eyes, a creature that is super smart, that moves around and has just a single purpose in doing it. And we can't personify that as a human, but it is more into what an animal is that's coming to hunt us. Same with Predator and all these other animals that have been portrayed in different movies.
It's funny because the other movie we watched this weekend was, we're a creature of July 4th weekend movies. We also watched Jaws, and my kid had never seen that one before either. And she was like, well, the shark's just doing what sharks do. Like, why is everybody so mad at the shark? Like, he didn't do anything wrong. He's just eating, And so yeah,
Right.
Very much so.
Right.
Even sharks are innocents in a way.
Well, and that's what makes it scary, is that when you have an animal that hunts, right? So you had was it the Ghost in the Darkness, right? Was that the film? Right. That what made that so creepy is now you have an animal that's hunting in a pack for fun, right? It's doing something that's specifically doing something not out of its predatory instincts, but it's doing it because it's targeting humans who have encroached into their land. And so that kind of vengeance of nature coming back against humans is a really insightful way where animals do turn on that. And you see that in birds, in Hitchcock and other things. When animals do turn on humans, it's because we've done something wrong, right? We've encroached in their territory. We've done something wrong, and it reflects bad because their one-sided nature is just to eat or to kill or to do whatever. And the fact that we become the targets or the victims in that, even though they are the villains, it really reflects more on us than anything.
Do you think this has a broader cultural sort of impact, because we tend to portray some animals as more friendly, more nurturing, more intelligent, and others as more evil or bad? For example, snakes. There's a lot of snakes that are beneficial to the environment, good for gardens, good for whatever. But people always have, snakes are evil, or sharks are evil, or wasps and hornets are bad, but bumblebees are good. Or do you think that we as a society are just kind of, hey, this is just fun stuff, let's go with it?
I mean, I certainly think the way animals and insects and everything and all life are portrayed on film starts to have an effect on people. I see spiders as beneficial because spiders are out there largely eating the bad bugs, but you see spiders in movies and spiders are either giant sized or there's, millions of them, and there's arachnophobia, there's fear of spiders, and everybody is treating spiders as this horrible, plague on mankind. But meanwhile, like, they're not so bad. Like, they're actually keeping a lot of the worst bugs that we don't want in our houses out of the way. And so, but it does start to have that impact on you. You start to think that, yeah, bears, sharks, whatever the case may be, are nefarious or evil in some way, rather than they're just being true to their nature.
Yeah, I think that's been the problem, is that as a result of movies like Jaws or Arachnophobia or these other kinds of films, we've villainized these animals to a point where people now turn against them and say it's okay, it's justified to hunt, sharks, and people turn a blind eye to finning and other these horrific things that happen because they have been so dehumanized that it's okay for us to target them or hunt them or put them in a different category. And the same thing, goes the opposite for animals that are meek or something that's so innocent. As you have a deer, and it's like if a deer, you'll always see a deer getting hit by a car or being hunted or doing something. It's always prey, right? It's always something that's going to be sacrificed. You're always going to see a sheep in a certain way, and that also reflects on us, right? Because you see a sheep or a small animal that's tied to a post in Jurassic Park that's going to be food for a T-Rex, and that could be us, right? That's a good example of we're next. And so I think that how we associate with those animals really says a lot about how we want to personify not just ourselves, but also, how we treat them walking out of the theater and those experiences of how we treat them in society.
Yeah, for sure. I think you'd elicit a completely different response if there was a dog tied for the Tyrannosaurus Rex as opposed to, your sheep
Right.
or a cow.
Right. And that's also amazing when you see, like, there's some video where you see these cows that come and defend kids. I think there was a video of a boy in India that was being bullied, and a cow came in and defended him and drove the other kids away. Even I think they were just playing, but it was still a moment where the cow came in, and there's this little disconnect where you're like, wow, cows aren't supposed to be that smart, and you're like, wow, they are amazingly smart, and people just see them as food because of the way we've dehumanized them as well in our society. So that kind of ripples through not just entertainment, but in all facets of how we interact with animals.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Douglas Adams' restaurant, The End of the Universe, where the cow was like the maitre d' at the restaurant. Would you like some shank today?
Right.
I'll do my best to serve you. It's terrible.
Right.
So what are some of the challenges in terms of writing stories or narrative or even player interactions in a game that revolve or involve animals?
I think when you're talking about, like, especially if you have any kind of production work, it's one thing if you're working in a medium where you can construct everything, where, in a comic, in a book, even to some extent a game, you have a lot of freedom to be able to, like, manipulate what that animal does. When you get into film and television, obviously working on set with animals is challenging. So now you're looking at, like, am I doing that practically? Am I using a real animal on set? Am I doing a CG one? Am I doing some kind of prosthetic? I have a movie that I'm working on right now where there's a devastating thing that happens at the beginning of the story that wipes out this town, and this man comes and interacts with a large buck or an elk or a deer, and there's a pretty traumatic scene that happens between the two of them, and I really don't want to do that all CG, and I really don't want to do it with practical, but it's going to be very hard to get an elk or a deer to go along with some of the stuff that we want to do to make it dramatic for the audience. So, those are things I think that practically when you're writing or creating a story, you have to take into account, because what's good for the story is sometimes tougher on production and your budget, and then that's the first thing that gets axed out of your budget. So sometimes you have to weigh that out. But at the same time, it does speak volumes as to what your characters are relating to.
On the comic book side, I think the thing we try to be wary of is not writing animal characters just humans who have no reason to be animals other than that it's maybe a visually compelling thing. Like the Ninja Turtles are largely just teenage boys playing around like martial arts trained teenagers, but you also don't want them to just be boys. You want there to be some sort of an aspect to them, because they started as turtles, who evolved and became what they are, these mutates. So you try to keep a bit of the animal tendencies or attributes, something, so it's not just using them as a direct stand-in with no regard at all for the fact that they're not humans. So that, at times that'll inform what you're doing. If it's something like My Little Pony, then it just, you're writing cute little girls and boys essentially as ponies, so you don't worry as much about it. But as you go along, if the sort of stories are a bit more sophisticated, you try to not just use them as human stand-ins for no reason other than that it looks cool. You want something more behind it.
Yeah, you get a comical challenge, Guardians of the Galaxy, right? You're going to have that. But or the flip side is, like, I've got a game that I've been directing for the past 20 years called Persona, and in the latest installment, as these characters go into this alternate universe, there's a character that kind of guides them, and in that world, the character is personified as this talking cat. But in the real world, it's actually a real physical cat. And anyone who's gone to this other world can understand the cat, but anyone else just hears this meowing. So it's kind of a fun mechanic, because the character itself resents the fact that he keeps saying, I'm not a cat, but yet very much is, and has to reluctantly accept that in the real world when people want to pet him and nurture him. But then in the other world, he can fight alongside them, much like in Guardians of the Galaxy or other kind of adventures.
The Secret Life of Pets movies are, I think, a good distillation of that, where, they've got humanish traits and they're interacting with one another and they're talking and involved in these adventures. But in the middle of it, a cat will be ranting or something and then stop to just lick its paw and wash its face and, sort of have that cat indifference here and there amidst all the human traits. And I think that's a very fun way of doing kind of what I'm talking about in its purest form, which is merging both parts of, human and animal together.
Yeah, I worked on this game that was based on this great Disney film that's so underrated, and I went back and rewatched it with my family, and I just remembered how brilliant this film was. But Emperor's New Groove, where you've got a character who gets transformed into a llama, right? And he's this really conceited character, but then he's humbled by becoming a very docile type of animal, right? And he still doesn't lose his personality, but reluctantly through the course of it, he either has to go that direction and become this docile animal, or change his ways and come back. And then they end up playing with a whole bunch of things where people get transformed into animals and other things. And the way they did that, I thought was really brilliant, because the comedy was there, the limitations of what each animal could do was hilarious, and you see that used quite a bit. So, and you can't imagine any Disney or any animated film that doesn't have animals in it to some extent, right? Any Pixar film is going to have it. Any sort of CG animated film or 2D animated film is going to have a lot of their characters represented by animals, and that's just sort of a standard fare for that world. So you can see how that plays into the personification as being human, or the limitations of being an animal.
Yeah.
Are the trends more towards that personification of animals in fantasy, sci-fi, and whatever? Or I mean, like we had the initial Superman's dog, for example, was their companion, friend, whatever. But these days, are things more towards Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with the personalities and the human attributes, or kind of something in the middle, like a Pikachu for Pokemon, where you've got a little bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like that. You watch something like, I don't know, Zootopia, where the sloths at DMV are sort of the sloth trait of moving very slowly, sort of playing off the stereotypical DMV worker who maybe also doesn't move at a speed that we would all like. So I think yeah, finding those animal traits that you can sort of personify through the way humans interact is a very fun way to go.
Yeah, for sure. I think you also see it kind of polarizes a little bit of the genres. You'll always see a family-friendly film that's going to embrace animals, right? And as you get a little bit more teen or adult, that will obviously transform into a different specific use for how those animals are treated. And, in a horror film, an animal that's closer to humans is always going to become that example of what we can be or how close we can. So if you look at a movie like 28 Days Later, right, the whole premise, right, is this rage has been injected and bestowed into monkeys, right, because that's going to transform into us. Or even the Planet of the Apes reboot movies, which did a brilliant job of personifying these monkeys, are us, right? It's that reflection of us in a species that is so close, but obviously still in the animal kingdom. And what's really interesting, if you look at the characters, especially in some of the more recent Planet of the Apes films, you have the gorillas versus the orangutans versus the other monkeys, and where they are in that class structure also reflects on the class structure that we have as humans. And that's really interesting, because when you have like a large gorilla that is seemingly less intelligent than one of the other species that's closer to us, and then that one, one of them gets killed or injured, you almost have more sympathy for that one, because they don't have the intelligence, or they don't have the bandwidth of that. They have only that pure compassion, like the way we look at dogs. And so that's a really interesting way to kind of look at how we do personify animals in those, because we don't really articulate those, but we say, okay, these class structures do exist in humans. So when we see them in animals, we are forced to kind of deal with those.
Have you seen or encountered anything controversial in a recent project that had use of animals, or one of your own, or one from somebody else's, where it was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if the usage of the animal or the character was necessarily appropriate, or was too far, out of bounds? Or
Well, there's a Black Mirror episode, but no, I'm trying to think of something that's an all ages kind of reference.
Fair enough.
But I mean, I think, I don't know, anytime an animal is injured in film, it sort of makes us all cringe a little bit. I mean, we've sort of entered the period where dogs just cannot, like in a big action movie, people might get wiped out by the scores, but animals are sort of untouchable, which removes a little bit of the dramatic tension. But when it's a big budget movie aimed at a broad audience, that's what they're going for. But on those rare instances where something is a bit more realistic, when an animal gets hurt, you feel it that much more palpably.
Yeah, I think universally most people, because this generation of storytellers are so trying to be inclusive and trying to broaden their horizons and sympathy and inclusive for everyone, including animals. And so, it even goes so far as to the sound of an animal being hurt, right? If you ever think about a movie where there's an alien invasion and you hear the dog barking and then suddenly the dog is silenced, or you hear a yipe, just that sound tells us everything, right? And that's the most devastating part for us, is that if an animal is injured, even if we don't know what's happened, that tells us a lot about, how we, reflect on that. So I think, from my experience, most of the stories and projects and productions that I've worked on, or how I see it being characterized in products, is this unanimous sympathy and inclusiveness of animals, and not really the abuse. I mean, that's why when we see what happens in other countries where different animals are treated different ways. My wife and I had became vegetarian like 25 years ago because we had seen this documentary where there were, my wife is a huge cat lover, and there's documentaries, an HBO documentary, and talking about our relationship with animals, and how in India they're sacred to have a cow, but yet in the United States we see them as food. And here we are as animal lovers here in the United States, and then in China, you go to a wet market and you might see a cat being used as food. But in this documentary, no holds barred. I mean, they showed what happens, the whole process. And that night, my wife became vegetarian because she saw that. It's like, oh, wow. In that culture, they see what we see as a pet as food. And that disconnect of our relationship with an animal versus another culture is so enlightening, because, look at a country, again, like India, where a rat may be believed to be a spiritual ancestor of someone reincarnated. So you'll see these temples infested with thousands of rats, which we know can carry disease and all sorts of other things. And so then the Indian government at night has to hire these people to go out with crowbars and try to, calm down the rat population, because otherwise they have this thing spreading. But religiously, it would be devastating to their culture. So we're fighting sort of the reality of so our relationship and like, as we can see in the middle of a pandemic, our relationship with animals and how sensitive that balance can be when we intrude too far one way or the other. And then the other side is what we envision as animals or companions to us. So culturally, it does change. And I think we're taking this worldview of how we treat sharks and how we treat monkeys and how we treat rats and cats and other things that are perceived in other cultures much differently.
Well, I think that really goes to the importance of animals, just straight across the board. Again, looking back at, storytelling, graphic novels, games, or whatever, animals that always play their central role. They add to atmosphere. And, as we're telling these stories, we can identify with them. And I think as creators, it's, partially our responsibility to, do what we can to portray them the right way and to kind of help them out. And as you're saying earlier, if even with basic audio recording, there's a reason we still have to have those disclaimers at the end of movies. No animals were harmed in the making of, because I think, animals are important. They've really become a strong and critical part of our society. I mean, I treat my dog and cat like it's my kid. And I think many other, pet lovers do for good reason.
They are family.
I do think from a storytelling perspective too, it's often shorthand to put an animal in peril. So that's the thing that as storytellers overall, I think we've gotten better about not doing, and certainly in like the comics we published, I steer people away from the easy shorthand. In comics, it used to be everybody was a male. Superheroes were all white males. And then it was all their girlfriends were in peril all the time. And so it became, well, we can't kill the hero, but we can't kill the hero's girlfriend or spouse. And so then finally everybody was like, enough of using those characters in that way to sort of prop up the hero. And by that same token, like, let's stop using animals in that easy shorthand. Let's stop using animals as a way to just create quick sympathy or easy peril, and try harder to tell stories that really create tension in I don't know, less inflammatory or exploitationary ways.
But it's
So
also it's a reflection on us too of how animals are used, because if you have a dog that's growling at someone, that says a lot about the character he's growling at, right? Because that dog or that wolf or whatever that animal is senses a trait that's not so wholesome, right? Or at the same time, you see a dolphin that embraces a child, right? Or a whale that comes up to someone, and the gentleness of this massive animal coming over to someone says a lot about that trust and that bond that we have. So if an animal really likes a character or dislikes someone, that also helps inform the audience about sort of that relationship and who those characters are and how they treat those animals.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, just a sound check there. Okay, so taking things a step further and kind of getting into some of the future tech. Again, my favorite topic, AR and VR. There are technologies that can kind of give life to things. We can pull characters out of a page, or out of a game, or you know, just kind of out of thin air. Whether it's an immersive environment like a game or VR, or more in the AR side where we can have little holograms running around. Again, you know, Pokemon Go or whatever. There's just a bit of a two-part question. So first, how do you view these technologies as emerging and impacting, and how we can kind of, you know, interact with animals in our entertainment properties? But also more so, do you see other applications where maybe whether it's a character from an established property or something entirely new, where you know, an avatar pet might be a stand-in for, you know, a therapy animal, or for educational purpose for, say, a child that has some you know, some trauma experiences or something else. Do these things need stories to go along with them? Can they be on their own? Are these enabling technologies that will change or enhance what we're doing in current media? Just kind of broad open question there.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, obviously all the emerging technologies that are overlapping and allowing us to have more immersive experiences are super engaging, and they're allowing us to sort of go to areas that we normally couldn't go. And as people are not going to theaters as much, well, especially not now, but even though you saw the decline in theatrical experiences, and the promise of what VR was trying to do in terms of giving you an isolated sort of experience, a 360 experience. The idea is that people do want that immersion. They want that ability to be able to be immersed in that space. But the difficulty is the delivery of that experience, and to get to the realism that we as storytellers want versus the economics and the platform and the technology of where it's at has been really challenging over the past 5 years. And as wonderful as the projects we've gotten to be able to work on, finding those audiences, just because of the limitation of hardware and audiences, has been a real challenge. So the more difficult part has been doing broader storytelling, just because of the financial budgets and sort of the scope of doing those projects, to have them justified without the install base. So what we're finding is that more immersive experiences and experiential sort of activations versus long form storytelling is a much more beneficial way, because you can have an experience swimming with whales or going underwater and experiencing this amazing sort of journey, or being there with a tiger, or doing something that you probably wouldn't be able to do in real life very easily, or in a story it would be too short of an experience to be able to do something with it. So I think from everything from therapy, as you mentioned, all the way through these more personal encounters with animals, is proving to be a really fascinating way and use of all these mixed technologies that are really becoming available to us.
yeah. I mean, and to some degree, I don't even know if you want stories with some of that. You know, you watch like the Planet Earth documentary series, and you're immersed. You're almost getting the animal's eye view of their life, whether it's, you know, a lizard being chased by snakes, and you're following. There's some tension in the way it's edited, and sort of they're telling you a story, but part of it you want to feel like you're just seeing what that animal's experience and what their lives are like, without feeling like you're being so directed in a way that there's a you don't want to be aware of the story being told. You just kind of want to be immersed in that story. And then on the other side of it, like for little kids, all the way back to, I don't know, the Tamagotchi or Pokemons or Animal Crossing now, I think to some degree they like the aspect of nurturing and caring for a thing, but don't necessarily care as much about its backstory as much as just that interaction of feeling like that they are caring for this virtual thing. So in some ways, I mean, story is always important, but in other ways, you kind of just want to use this technology to let people experience things that, like Keith says, they would otherwise never be able to experience.
Yeah,
You saw some of the early VR stuff that got funded. There was one that was just literally just swimming alongside a massive whale, and it was just a very realistic VR experience that was done super well, and it was like 30 seconds, a minute long, but it was so immersive that generated funding for the company and a whole immersive kind of experience, beyond that. And I think as people, especially coming out of this pandemic in a year or so, are going to be wanting to go back out and experiencing things again, not just at home, but going out into public, and that might not be in theaters. So as someone goes to an aquarium or someone goes out to a mall or goes somewhere else, they are going to look for these experiential activations that will transport them into something that is different from their reality. And for those people who really do have animals as a big part of their life, having that experience in that way in a safe capacity is phenomenal.
Okay, I'm going to change topics up a little bit because I think we're getting a little short on time. What would you say is the most influential or popular animal, either historically or in more modern times, like the last 10 or 20 years?
Wow.
Mickey Mouse doesn't count.
Oh, not species. You mean the specific animal?
Character.
Character, huh?
Or use of. I mean, like Lassie would count.
Right. It's interesting because, like, in a negative way, obviously Jaws was probably one of the most influential, because you look at even things like Sharknado now, coming back around, where you're actually cheering for the sharks, right? Because the people are so horrible that you want the sharks to be able to do that. But as a character that I think culturally that would be embedded with us, I mean, obviously we use animals, everything from our state flag in California to a national level with a bald eagle, but in terms of wow. Yeah, I'd have to say something like Jaws is still, even though it's 30, 40 years old, is definitely still up there.
It is still a touchstone even for generations that haven't seen it. They know the music, or they've somehow absorbed bits of the movie, having never even seen it, probably because it's been parodied or referenced in so many other TV shows and movies along the way. So yeah, I think even, 45 years later, it still looms, very large.
Yeah, literally, those two notes tell you everything, right? Does those two notes John Williams did, and like that's it. That's a shark.
That's brilliant stuff there. Okay, so as a follow-on to that, what's your absolute favorite animal or character, or usage of an animal as a character?
Wow.
So like Usagi Yojimbo would be, for example, a great use of a rabbit as a samurai. That's, it's interesting, unique. I happen to like Japanese stuff or whatever. Or, hey, Mickey Mouse is just great for kids. It's really easy to identify with. Or, do you have a personal favorite? Or
I mean, Usagi is definitely up there for me, and that's probably a much more palatable example than my mouse reference earlier, because it is a way that Stan Sakai, the creator, used that character as a rabbit to be able to tell these samurai stories and bring in a lot of Japanese lore and legends in ways that looked fitting. You see demons alongside a rabbit samurai, and it doesn't look as jarring or as hard to swallow as demons alongside a realistically drawn human. And so it also allowed him to show these battles and crazy fights, and in some cases a lot of violence in ways that were still palatable for a very large audience, and we're not gratuitous in any way. And so yeah, I mean, Usagi is one that, like, that's, that one and the Ninja Turtles both turned 35 last year. And those have both been with me all along. And I mean, I love the way both of those are used to tell stories that sort of bring in different aspects of those characters and the animals at the same time. So yeah, if I can steal your answer, I'm gonna steal Usagi Yojimbo.
I'm gonna go totally family friendly. I love Rex from Toy Story. I just love the idea that you can personify a T-Rex as a toy and then still have that bond with this terrified little toy. But I love the way that Pixar has always taken their animals in that direction. Be able to do that. Even my friend John Ratzenberger, who plays Ham, it was just such a great way to personify that, right, as a piggy bank and be able to do that. But every time I see Rex with my kids, everyone just is like cheers for him. He's so pathetically humble and amusing. So
I think I'm going to go with the Holy Grail rabbit.
there, big pointy teeth.
I know exactly what you're talking about when you say that. It's like so horrifying and cute at the same time.
Now, I wonder if that actually had an influence on kids. Like, honey, do you want a pet rabbit? Like, no.
Not anymore. All right, I think I think we're at the 45-minute mark. Fernanda, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys, amazing conversation. You guys mentioned so many things that I hadn't even thought about. So one of the questions that we have is, we have so many animals that serve as sidekicks, or, maybe a storyline where the main character is motivated because of a tragedy or, some sort of harm done to an animal. But do you have any favorite examples of an animal being the superhero or a hero in the story? For me, I think of Marley and Me, and how Marley's story, he was a terrible dog, but he saved them. He was, what kept them grounded during, such a journey of life.
Robert also referenced Crypto earlier, Superman's dog, and so at times he was played as just that, just the sidekick. But every now and then he would get his own story, and follow him on his own adventures. And I read it was an older comic that was done by the creator of Watchmen, Alan Moore. He wrote sort of the last iteration of Superman before they brought out the next iteration of Superman. And in it, all of his biggest bad guys come back and sort of do this all-out assault, and they actually take out some of his close friends. And it's sad, but then Crypto gets involved in the adventure, and Crypto meets his end saving Superman, and it's so touching and so sad, and it's just a reminder of how, when animals are portrayed well in media, that it can have such a sort of resonant impact on you, even sort of far above and beyond humans at times.
Yeah, it's interesting for me. Like I love animals of every different shape and size, and in my own personal life, I've gone out and tried to have experiences with animals. For my wife's birthday, I took her to train a tiger, and then she trained a bear. And we're at this with a trainer to be able to work with these animals. And one year, a friend of ours who was relocating, he had 2 African elephants. And one was Michael Jackson's elephant that was rescued from the ranch, and got to spend this time with these animals and have this really personal bond. So when I see them in films, like, it's hard for me to pick anyone that's a really favorite, because each species in its own way represents something. And that's what we talked about, like Zootopia earlier, and you see how this whole world of animals and how each animal is kind of portrayed that way. So for me, it's hard to focus on any one particular one, but it just keeps making me think about these different experiences that we do have with animals in our personal life, and how we reflect on them and be able to sort of see those represented in film and entertainment.
I've got to go with the Penguins of Madagascar.
Oh yeah.
That's like my dev team right there, right? Get it done, program. Right.
Or the seagulls in Finding Nemo. Mike?
Yeah, Mike.
Do you guys see any increase or more interest in rescue animals being used or portrayed in some of these stories?
I don't know if I've spotted more of that in media, but I've certainly seen a lot of it in real life. The thing I want to see more of is more people being aware of conservation and the need to sort of safeguard animals and not treat them like our friends or like things they can exploit. Like, it made me crazy that Tiger King became so popular, because there's a place in San Diego, Lions and Tigers and Bears, and it's a conservation area where they'll go in and rescue lions, tigers, and bears that people have taken as pets, and it's a no pet conservation park, and it just makes you aware of, like, these are wild animals. And so when you see something like Tiger King and everybody's raving about, which person is the better person, or wanting to go see tigers and sort of interact with them in ways, you're just like, we got to stop that. Like, I want to see more portrayals of animals as things that we respect and treat sort of respectfully, and not exploit them in those kind of ways. I think that's the thing I tend to react more to nowadays.
And you are seeing an explosion right now of everyone in quarantine has been getting rescue animals. We just got a cat yesterday. Well, all of our friends have gotten new animals from rescue shelters. And I think culturally that's become a really big part of companionship right now, as everyone has been socially distanced and isolated. But I think, like you said, this bigger message of sort of conservation and around the world, right? It's not just, what's happening to us locally here in California or across the United States, but really worldwide, and how our relationship with animals is so important. And that's why I got involved in some of the activities of sort of bringing just sort of recognition of the fact that finning has been shedding the planet of these sharks that are just being used for their fins, and 99% of the animal is left to die and waste, and it's not even for food. I would understand, at least if it was part of a fishing operation, which still probably wouldn't be good, but in this case, culturally things have changed worldwide, and I think that idea of conservation and rescuing animals, and not just going in for profit, but actually finding conservation in healthier ways. And to Chris's point about, like, Tiger King, these some of these rescue shelters, or these things that are taking in animals, have a very specific cause, and when they turn to tourism, it does change sort of not just the monetary side of it, but how the animals are perceived.
You also hope that all the people that are adopting dogs and cats and other pets right now as comfort animals to get through this quarantine realize that the comfort is a two-way street. Like, I hope they keep those animals and continue to care for them post, assuming there is a post to all of this, but that those animals don't end up back in shelters, that they need to realize that, the animals are bringing them comfort, but they need to continue giving comfort to those animals too. So I hope everybody's happy with their pets that they've adopted, and continue.
Well, and that was a real tragedy that I think you saw after films like 101 Dalmatians and other things, right? Because you see these adorable animals, both the live action and the animated versions, where all these kids are like, Mommy, Daddy, I want one of those pets. And then they get one and they realize, like, a Dalmatian might not be the easiest pet to be able to keep around the house. And so I think that it definitely, to your point, is that really makes it challenging, because people are like, they want that companionship. And then once life gets back to normal, they don't have time to care for the animal. And that can have a negative impact after all this.
Right. Or they want the objectified kitten or puppy, and then 6 weeks into it, it's too much mess, and this dog's growing. It's not what I wanted. I think I don't think I think that's probably something I'd like to see, is maybe more exposure in terms of the responsibility of animals, and how they're they have feelings and needs too. They're not just Instagram objects for your feed.
I think
So
also
that's the
understanding.
dangerous things too.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct about, when it comes to, that's something that we've thought about here, of course, at Helen Woodward. And I think education has a lot to do with it, and training, and making sure that adopters and people, even in the public, that we're educating them through films and through, the media about what it's like to, get a pet. Of course, we saw the same thing that you were mentioning with the Dalmatians, with Huskies and Game of Thrones. And Huskies can be incredibly energetic breeds, that if people weren't aware and just saw, this beautiful creature on TV, that it could pose some problems.
Yeah, I think people really have to do a lot of research into the type of animal they're getting, not just for the appearance, but really the personality traits. We fell in love with Shelties just because their breeding, and even some of the negative and positive things, are just very positive for our family environment. And when we've had other dogs, it's been a very noticeable change. And for us, we're just Sheltie people. And so I think each person, it's a very personal connection, not just with that pet, but also sort of the instincts that are bred into that species.
So you're saying, had I waited at all, I might have been aware that pugs have a snoring issue that is going to take some adjustment.
That info might have been out there.
Yeah.
So before we wrap up, and we're so grateful to have you guys all here, I just want to give you each a chance to talk about some things that you're excited about when it comes to the work that you do, if it involves animals, of course, or some of the things that you guys are working on, including you, Robert.
Chris, you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, before that, I want to say, like, I appreciate what Helen Woodward does. Like, we boarded the dog at Helen Woodward before, and I was really impressed by the operation and the care that you all put into the animals there. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that kind of care and conservation. I feel like that translates well to the people who are frequenting the places too. So hopefully it makes everybody else, better citizens with all of their animals. And beyond that, we publish 30, 40 comic books a month. A lot of them are based on animals in some form or another. And so that's always been a thing that we've been engaged by, and plan to continue that going forward. And so yeah, we'll keep making comics about, turtles and rabbits and ponies and other such animals, as long as people keep liking them.
We love it.
Keith?
For me, I'm involved in producing and directing a tremendous amount of games this year. This is just since the pandemic, our work has exploded like tenfold, just because everyone's playing games even more so than when they didn't have time before this. But I was fortunate enough to raise funding for one of my own original projects that was based on one of our graphic novels, and that's being made into a television series and a video game right now. So we're spending the bulk of this summer, and hopefully by Christmas we're going to have an announcement for that. So it's nice to be able to spend time with our family in the midst of this horrific storm that's going on across our planet, and spend time with our family and our pets, and be able to be creative and still work and be sustainable, in the midst of this, and then be able to spend time with you guys and support really great causes as well.
Cool. For us, we're trying hard to push the boundaries of what AR and VR can do together, and a good bit of that is going to be, pets or animals or whatever that are AI driven and responsive, and I think in some cases can stand in for those therapy pets or therapy dogs, or cases where you might need to nurture something, but you live in an area where you can't have pets or you have allergies or other sort of things. So while we're doing a lot of fun stuff, we also take a view towards how can we really make this tech useful for people and have an impact.
That's incredible. I love that. Well, thank you guys so much for being a part of this. We really appreciate it. You guys are heroes to pets, and we love that you guys were able to participate. If anyone's watching and wasn't able to catch the whole panel, of course, you can come back and we'll have them all recorded and posted for you to watch. So thank you guys so much, and we'll let you get on with your day.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Snuggles to your pets.
Awesome.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.